Well, hello, everyone. I'm Rabbi Stephen Moskowitz of Congregation Lador Vador here on Long Island. We're very much looking forward to learning with Charles Jacobs this evening. I want to begin by saying a few thank yous. First of all, thank you to our enrichment committee, and in particular, Judy Hirschon and Suzanne Sepperson for helping to organize this program. I want to also thank my colleagues and some neighboring synagogues who are helping to sponsor this program. Temple Beth Torah of Melville and its Rabbi Susie Hennison Moskowitz, among my favorite rabbis on Long Island, of course. Old Westbury Hebrew Congregation and Rabbi Mickey Stanger, and Tifereth Israel in Glen Cove and Rabbi Erwin Huberman. And I also see Cantor Gustavo Gitlin is on our program this evening. So thank you to our neighboring synagogues for helping to sponsor this program, and our congregation's enrichment committee for its work. Before Judy Hirschon introduces Charles, our guest, I just want to say just the agenda for this evening is after the introduction, Charles is going to do a presentation. We'll, of course, open it up to then questions and answers to Charles before we conclude the program. And again, just as a reminder, this program is being streamed to Facebook, our congregation's Facebook page and YouTube channel, so that you can share the program with others after its conclusion. I also want to invite everyone here to join us next Wednesday evening, November 17th at 7 p.m. For the next in our current events series. Representative Steve Israel will be in conversation with Farid Ferdows, who served in Afghanistan with the United States military. And we'll be talking about after Afghanistan, both what happened during the time in Afghanistan and after the withdrawal. Farid now lives in the United States and is a recent graduate of Cornell University. So with that, I'm very much looking forward to learning from Charles. And Judy, if you'll honor us by introducing our guest.
Thank you, Rabbi. Welcome, everyone. In 2004, Columbia University hosted a two-day conference in response to a film produced by the David Project, Columbia Unbecoming. Among many speakers, which included several luminary activists in the Jewish world, were a few strapping Sudanese young men who related their dramatic passage from child slavery to freedom due to the efforts of Charles Jacobs. That was my memorable introduction to Charles, whose talk I do not now remember, but I do remember those young men and their passionate gratitude. Thus, I've had the pleasure of following Charles and his amazing career for almost 20 years. Dr. Jacobs is an activist, journalist, founder, and co-founder of pro-Jewish and human rights organizations, including the Boston branch of CAMRA, the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting in America, the American Anti-Slavery Group, the David Project, and Americans for Peace and Tolerance. In 2000, he received the Boston Freedom Award from Coretta Scott King for helping redeem hundreds of African slaves from jihadists in Sudan. He had flown illegally into that war-torn country 3 times to help with the liberation of slaves. In 2007, he was named among America's top 50 Jewish leaders by The Forward. Charles has been widely published, including the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Boston Globe, the Jerusalem Post, and the Encyclopedia Britannica. He has appeared on local and national television and radio, including NBC, CBS, NPR, CNN, JBS, and PBS. He is currently president of Americans for Peace and Tolerance and a board member of Scholars for Peace in the Middle East. In an interview published in 2010, Charles, with great prescience, had stated, quote, "The Jewish community had a wonderful 50 years after the end of World War II, but the world has changed. And unfortunately, some of our leaders seem not to have recognized this. Given our small size and our sizable foes, the Jewish community has always valued unity. Unity is important, but I reluctantly decided to become critical of some of our leaders because of the seriousness and urgency of the current situation. A few months back, I decided to break what is in effect a gentleman's agreement among Jewish leaders not to criticize each other in public. At the end of an op-ed about Wafa Sultan, the courageous Muslim reformer who risks her life daily to fight real threats posed by Islamists to us all, I chided ADL for its relative silence on this, the greatest threat to Jews today. When Abe Foxman responded with a letter to my hometown Jewish paper attacking me, I began a series of articles on the ADL's failure, and I proposed a list of key principles for beginning a serious effort against Islamic anti-Semitism, end of quote. I have to say, it has been my longtime aspiration to host tonight's guest and feel extremely privileged to welcome Charles and all of you and to hear him speak to us about the situation of American Jewry today and what can be done going forward. So Charles, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Judy. Can I be heard? Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you, Judy, for reading that letter from my mother. Tonight, I'm going to speak about a difficult topic, about the current state of American Jewry, which many of us find somewhat frightening. This is a new time for us. I think our situation has dramatically changed. I'm going to talk about where we are and how we got here. And we need to take a look at how American Jewish leadership is or is not protecting us from these mounting threats. And as you'll see, and as Judy hinted, I'm quite concerned about the performance of our leadership. Finally, I have some suggestions as to what it is that we should be doing. This really should be a 2-day seminar, but I'm going to do it with the rabbi's blessing in 45 minutes, with time afterwards for a Q&A. So let me share my screen, and there we go. Okay, one sec. Let's see. There we go. Okay, so I just wanted to start out with some pictures to show you that Judy did not make this up. That is me on the right in Sudan. I was helping to liberate jihad slaves from Sudan in a war that had taken over 2 million, mostly Christian Black lives in the South. We eventually got President Bush to intervene, and through our anti-slavery movement, which did something that may no longer be possible to do, we united the left and the right on the issue of the enslavement of Blacks. I don't know if that could be done. I'm still trying to do it with with a Nigerian catastrophe. And then on the left, there is Martin Luther King's widow and Thomas Menino, the mayor, and I did get the prize. So Judy didn't lie. Okay. There is a deepening crisis, and we're going to think about what there is to be done. So what is the current state of American Jewry, psychologically and realistically? I think we're increasingly anxious. There are increasing security concerns. I know that when I was bar mitzvahed in the Bronx, way back, and then when I got married, and then when I went to shul to go to services, we didn't need armed police. And now I am told that practically every Jewish institution, every Jewish synagogue is concerned about security or has security, sometimes armed security. This is a huge change for us. Why? What's happening? I could go on for hours and hours listing you or developing a list of all the terrible things that are happening, not just the violent ones, but the non-violent ones. But Jews have been murdered in Pittsburgh, San Diego, Jersey City. You could see videos. Jews can see videos of Jews being beaten up in the streets in New York City of what was something like a pogrom in Los Angeles. You could see videos of people storming a Jewish building in Hoboken with gunfire. Right here in Boston, a rabbi was stabbed. Jews are in universities. The Jewish students are under siege. Daily, we're defamed by the New York Times. Daily, if anybody wants to read the best pushback on the latest New York Times provocation, read Daniel Gordis's piece. It's fantastic. We're maligned in the United States Congress, and we're demonized in politics. This has an effect. The latest polls show that more than half of Jewish students feel that they are unsafe, and half of them hide their identity. Imagine that in America, the Golden Medina, right? FBI hate statistics show that Jews are the group that is most targeted by violent attacks. My friend just did a deep dive into the FBI statistics, and he comes back with Jews are 10 times more likely to be smacked, to be hit than Asians. 10 times. Okay, so let's go to the sky, 30,000 feet up. Let's look down on the game board, on the playing field. And what I see is a perfect storm. What I see is that the four largest world ideologies, apart from classical liberalism, which is under siege from progressives, but apart from classical liberalism, four major ideologies are all at once, and that's important, all at once, targeting Jews. So the two on the left, the radical Islamists and the radical leftists, we call that the Red-Green Alliance. That Red-Green Alliance is the thing that is chasing Jews out of Europe. If you notice the skyrocketing prices of condos in Jerusalem, it's not only because Israel's doing great, it's because all the French Jews are putting their fingers on something that they may have to run to in buying properties. The white supremacists we know, and the black supremacists we need to know more about. So the tree of life. So let's take a look. The white supremacists, we've known about these people. They have been here forever. They will always be here. Right-wing, racist, anti-Semites. But the question is, why are they coming out now when for so long they wouldn't show their face too much? And now they're coming out and they're murdering us. On campuses, the left-wing, radical leftists, you could call them, Palestinianists, anti-Israelists, have made the life of Jewish students on campus in many, but not all places, in many places, really stressful, really stressful. I can tell you stories that, you could cry about. These nice Jewish kids going to school, identified now as oppressive white, adjacent whites, targeted and tainted with all of the bad things that white society has. They're the 1% of the 1%ers, the Jews now. And of course, they cruelly, unnecessarily oppress and occupy the indigenous, indigent, innocent, darker skinned Palestinians. So the Jews are racists. Anybody who, that's the line that's coming out from this quarter. This quarter is growing. Okay. Radical Islamists. Here in Boston, we have the largest mosque in the Middle East, bigger than the one in the East Coast. Bigger than even the one in New York City. And the guy who set this up is Yusuf Qaradawi. Yusuf Qaradawi is the spiritual head of the Muslim Brotherhood. And you could see him if you Google him every day saying things like, throughout history, Allah has imposed upon the Jews. The last punishment was carried out by Hitler. This was divine punishment for them. Now, we don't know enough deeply about the Farrakhanist Black nationalist front against us. And I'm going to show you something that's going to be pretty upsetting. Part of this, I think you probably have seen, but some of it you haven't seen, and I'm sorry to show it to you, but we have to open our eyes.
Satanic Jews that control everything and mostly everybody. You know what they do? Call me an anti-Semite. Stop it. I'm anti-termite.
Jews have ever been present among us is to open their outposts, their retail stores, to sell us damaged, cheap goods marked up against the price. They were down there in the cotton fields in the Mississippi Delta teaching the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants who were too stupid to keep us in check after the end of the Civil War. It was the Jews that have taught the white man all the way up to the NBA right now, a modern day microcosm of a plantation. Minister Farrakhan, contrary to this idea, he attacks them. He is Allah's weapon against them as a light-giving son. He is exposing them. He is making them known because through the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad that only he is bringing, that's right, we will be freed of this blood-sucking parasite, so they will no longer be able to sell us alcohol, drugs, depraved sex, and every other type of low-life thing that is keeping us from a hereafter.
The deluge of anti-Semitic attacks in Brooklyn over the last couple of weeks committed exclusively by members of the Black.
It seemed like the Jewish people own all the buildings out here, and they own everything, and they're not sharing nothing. They own everything. Then they're coming over here, they're taking over,
And
but
that's
they're
why-
not renting it back to us. See, they're kicking us out. Love conquers all. They're controlling all the jobs, the economic growth, and the community.
You think the Jews here are not really American?
They not.
So Black people would have reason to attack Jews.
I wouldn't say I have reason to, but it is understandable.
Shocking video shows kids in Philadelphia, in America, at an Islamic center appearing to vow to chop off heads and sacrifice their lives, all in the name of Allah. Watch.
صدقنا وهب الحياة رخيصة فازوا بجنات من الرضوان فاحت عطور المسك من أجسادهم أو هل تكون القدس عاصمة لهم وتكون مرجع مرجم وجبان وسنضرب الأعناق عن أجسادهم ونحرر الأقصى الحزين العالي ونقود جيش.
We will chop off their heads.
Just a second, just go back for a second and think about what I've shown you. I think Farrakhan may be the most dangerous single individual to the Jews. No one is going to go up to him and punch him in the nose. No one is going to challenge him directly. The Jewish leadership has not found a way to effectively take him down a notch. He's only gotten stronger. You saw the picture of him posing with Obama. More recently, he has had tremendous success with Black celebrities and sports figures. And all of them spread that message in ways that are unimaginably powerful and wide-reaching through social media. And that is extraordinarily, you notice that it was Fox News, by the way, that showed the piece about the Muslim kids in Philadelphia. Now, that's because on both sides of our political divide, people only want to talk about the bad anti-Semitic content and promotion of the other side. And so it's only, unfortunately, pretty much for the most part, it's only people on the right who have exposed or tried to expose both Farrakhan and the Islamists, where people on the left are, as you know, targeting the right-wing neo-Nazis. And of course, we have the problem of influence of Jew-hating people from places on the earth where they come from, anti-Semitic cultures, people steeped in anti-Semitism throughout the Arab world, and they're coming to the United States, and this is this is really a taboo subject because so many Jews want to welcome the refugees, even without, and they're afraid to even broach the topic of, well, let's vet them, let's see what they think, because what they think is probably not so good. And yet the Jewish community doesn't want to raise the question of vetting people who come from the most anti-Semitic cultures on the planet. So why we are now in a position where, let me say it this way, Israel has been defamed. The people who have taken the Palestinianist anti-Israel narrative those people have captured many of American major institutions. That is the professoriate, the media, the left-wing groups on campuses, now the high school curricula, the liberal churches, and also now the most energetic part of the Democratic Party. And so the word goes out and the message goes out, not necessarily in the right-wing neo-Nazi voice, or not even in the Farrakhan voice, but that Israel is bad, and Israel is the biggest Jewish project on earth. And so if Israel is bad and it's racist, that means, what's the logical next step? That all the Jews in America who support Israel must also be racists. And that is something that we hadn't thought of all these years fighting anti-Israelism. So I want to talk about how and why we have fallen. Anti-Semitism is a virus that morphs. There are variants, like there are variants of COVID, has different forms, but what is invariant is the pattern that anti-Semitism has. And let me just, this is Yossi Klein Halevi. He says it really, really well in 2 minutes.
What anti-Semitism does is turn the Jews, the Jew, into the symbol of whatever it is that a given civilization defines as its most loathsome qualities. And so, under Christianity before the Holocaust and Vatican II, the Jew was the Christ killer. His blood be upon our heads and upon our children. That's forever. Under communism, the Jew was the capitalist. Under Nazism, the Jew was the race bully, the ultimate race bully. Now we live in a different civilization. Now we live in the civilization where the most loathsome qualities are racism, colonialism, apartheid. And lo and behold, the greatest offender in the world today, with all the beautiful countries of the world, is the Jewish state. The Jewish state is the symbol of the genocidal, racist apartheid state. Criticism of Israel is not anti-Semitism. Criticism of Israel is denying Israel the right to exist, calling Israel the Zionist. That is anti-Semitism. That is a classical continuity of thousands of years of symbolizing. That kind of language can come today from the far left. It can come from white supremacists. It can come from Islamist extremists. It can come from many sources. But all of those groups converge on one idea. The Jew remains humanity's victim.
So how is it that the Jews, who are so smart, missed this new anti-Semitism? How is it that we fell for the line that criticism of Israel is legitimate criticism of Israel's policies? And even when the New York Times filled its pages with such criticism, reported on Jewish conduct more than it reported on almost everybody else's conduct. How is it that we continued to think that this was not going to lead to the place that we now are in, where so many more people are believing that Israel is bad, and inevitably that means that we Jews who support Israel are bad? This has weakened our reputation. This has, I believe, was the key that opened up the box of the neo-Nazis and the right-wing supremacists, the racist supremacists, who for years had been hiding under a rock because it was not proper to hate Jews in the way they hated Jews, but now they can. Now they can. Okay, so Jews are smart, and they sometimes know what anti-Semitism looks like and smells like. And so I want to go to Alan Dershowitz's favorite anecdote. So this is President Lowell from Harvard. So President Lowell from Harvard, wanted to restrict the number of Jewish students that came to Harvard because there were so many of them. Talented young men were were accepted, and he wanted to put a stop to that. So at a board meeting, this is a famous incident, he said, Jews cheat. And one of the board members, I think it was Learned Hand, said, wait a minute, but everybody cheats. Protestant kids cheat, Catholic kids cheat. And Lowell's answer was, keep this in mind, but we're talking about the Jews, okay? So how did the Jews not know to say when it came to Israel, wait a minute, every nation state in the world is the result of one group taking land away from another. There are no virgin birth nation states, maybe a Micronesian island somewhere, but France is a development that was one people took from another people. So why the Jews? Why the disproportionate focus on the Jews? And I think, and that's exactly what it is. And you can show that it's disproportionate. For example, there are 24 other barriers that separate people in conflict around the world. And they're listed here. Okay. But why is it that the only separation barrier in the world that is the apartheid wall is a Jewish wall? Why are not all of these apartheid walls? Look at the focus on Jewish cruelty, right? So between 1978 and 2014, there are about 4 million Muslims who were killed by other Muslims. And in that period, there are about 8,000 or 9,000 Muslims who were killed by Jews who didn't wake up one morning and say, gee, I hate Muslims, I'm going to kill them for no reason, but who killed them in self-defense, right? How is the world so focused on this disproportionate, unfair criticism of the Jews? Well, there's a problem. There's a problem. And that is that on the right, you see all of the countries that could be labeled as extremely evil, medium evil, low evil. Let me see if I can get rid of this thing here. Yeah, okay. On a scale of 0 to 10, if 10 is the most evil, where is Israel versus China, versus Mauritania, where there are hundreds of thousands of Black slaves today, versus Nigeria, where Blacks are being slaughtered and enslaved, versus Saudi Arabia, where there's female genital mutilation every day, versus all of them? How is it that Israel is being treated as the worst? And you know what? There's a Jewish trap. The Jews have trapped themselves because the Jews and the anti-Zionists both want a disproportionate focus on Jewish conduct. The Jews, because they want to make it better, right? It's Jewish law and Jewish custom and Jewish principle that self-criticism is a supreme moral value. It's a way to perfect our individual characters and to improve our societies. And so we want to know about it. And when we see anything that a Jew does, we want to make it better. And it's as though the Jews every day are clapping their chest, as in Yom Kippur. They want to be their Torah perfect self. But to the outside world, and especially to the anti-Zionists, who see those flaws as uniquely Jewishly evil, that serves them. And the Jews haven't really figured out a way to do self-criticism that does not become in the service of anti-Zionism. So I'll say it again. The anti-Zionists want to focus on, and the anti-Semites want to focus on Jewish flaws, which they portray as unique as proofs of Jewry's unique evil. And the Jews themselves are also focused on Jewish flaws, but for the opposite reason, to make us better. This has, in a way, been a trap for us. Where can I go? I do not, all right, there we go. Okay, so while Christians are being exterminated across the Middle East, the so-called human rights movement is focusing on Israel and ignoring that. And I can tell you that when I try to explain to people that the mass murder of Christians, Blacks, and the enslavement of men, women, and children in Sudan was an egregious, horrible human rights crime that everybody ought to drop what they're doing and run to the barriers to protest, it didn't happen. It didn't happen. And that is because that the human rights community is a fraud. The human rights community in the West is an absolute fraud because it doesn't care about the principle of equality. It doesn't care about the principle of a single standard for human conduct. It is there because it's mostly composed of decent white people who want to expiate their white sin, their white guilt. And anytime whites, and now the Jews are whites, are seen to be doing something bad, that for them is the most important thing, not to focus on the worst evils. And in fact, if you tell them about these things, about what's happening to women in the Middle East, or to, there are actually right now Black slaves in 5 African countries owned by Muslims, Algeria, Libya, Mauritania, Nigeria, and Sudan. If you tell them that, that distracts them. They don't want to hear about that because they're in this business of the human rights business to expiate, to make themselves, to confess, and to become better people because of what white people have done. This is a double sin because it falsely portrays the whites as much worse than they are, and it abandons the people who most need human rights power, and that is many of the people in the Middle East, the gays who are thrown off roofs or stoned, the women who are treated like chattel, the Black slaves, the Democrats, the secularists, the atheists in the Middle East. It abandons those people in order to selfishly focus on the sins of white people so that they can make themselves feel morally pure and better. This is a horrible, horrible sin, and the human rights community can be open to being attacked on this if people knew how to do politics properly. Okay, so I want to go back and tell you a story. The year is 1989. The new anti-Semitism is surging. Every day I'm sitting in Boston, I'm reading the Boston Globe, and I'm seething because day after day, the Jews are bad, the Israelis are bad. There was one that I think the most famous and funny one was, an Arab man was arrested after he tried to bomb something, but the bomb blew up in his face and he was blinded. And the Boston Globe headline was, Israel convicts blind Arab, right? So anyway, I'm sitting there and I met Andrea Levin, who heads camera, and we talked about forming camera in Boston. And we were about to form it. And the ADL guy in Boston, Lenny Zakem, you might know the Zakem Bridge, was named after him. He's a great guy. He comes to us and he says, don't do camera. Let the ADL be the ADL for Israel. And we said, why? He said, because if you do camera, you'll just be, you don't speak with the voice of the Jewish people. You'll be just one of many organizations in the big tent. And yes, you know, you can say all of the wonderful things you say, but if ADL says that the media is lying against the Jews again, they speak with the voice of the Jewish people, that would be powerful. And you know what? We said, yes, let him do it. And he didn't do it. And I want to tell you that if anybody writes a book about the history of these times, that day that he decided not to do that began the day of the decline of Jewish influence and power in America. Okay. Jew hatred is different, and it's deadly. It's different than hatred of Blacks. It's different than hatred of Asians. Most minorities are defamed by demeaning characteristics: lazy, indigent, stupid, etc. But the Jews are hated for the opposite reason. We're industrious, we're wizards, but we're scheming wizards. We don't stop. We're so clever. But what we're trying to do is to control and exploit the world. And what that means is that hatred of Blacks doesn't reach the point that hatred of Jews or hatred of Asians doesn't reach the point that hatred of Jews is, because the only thing you could do about these Jews is to eliminate them. You don't have to eliminate the Blacks if you hate them. You can, you know, be against giving them welfare, you can, whatever the racist stuff is, but they don't threaten Western civilization. They don't threaten Christendom or Islam. It's the Jews, because anti-Semitism is a conspiracy theory. And the solution is elimination, either of their religion, like happened, you know, forced conversions, the race that's under the Nazis, and now the state. Okay, so now we have to, that's where we are. And that's a little bit about why we are where we are. And I'm going to rush through this. Jewish leaders are failing to protect our community. I just want to say that if you look back to World War II, both in Europe and the United States, the same failure of leadership happened. They didn't understand the threat. They failed to protect Jewish lives. They suppressed dissent in the United States. You know the history of the Berkson Group and Jabotinsky's movement. They were delusional. They were cowardly. They failed to influence American policy. You know about the story about the St. Louis. And they assumed the civilized world would prevent genocide. And in America, they had this tremendous fear of dual loyalty. And they were morally cowards. Okay. Why is Jewish leadership failing? I mean, you know it's failing because anti-Semitism is rising dramatically all over the place. And if your job is to stop it, you have not stopped it. They don't understand the emerging threats. They don't want to understand it. They don't want to point to the politically incorrect sources of anti-Semitism. Why does the ADL focus extensively, almost exclusively on the neo-Nazis? Because there's nobody in the big tent who's going to be mad at them for that. Everybody in the world is going to be against neo-Nazis. But you know what? There's no Nazi professors on college campuses. There's no Nazis in the government, in the Democratic Party in the government that may stop the funding of help to Israel. They fail to understand the nature of political power. They have conflicting loyalties because many of them are leaning to the left and haven't understood the new anti-Semitism, and they're conflict averse. Our leaders are nice people. They don't like conflict. Americans are fat and happy. We're playing golf, we're playing mahjong. Most of the bad stuff hasn't hit us. We now are wincing and getting nervous because we see these terrible videos. Okay. So here's how they're failing us. They focus as I said, on the far right. They don't want to internalize. This is very painful for all of us because all of us grew up liberals. All of us, everybody on this Zoom is a classic liberal. We believe in equal opportunity. We don't believe in equality, demand for equality of results, but we do believe in equal opportunity. It's painful to internalize the left's betrayal of the Jews. They don't know what to do with it. And they're clinging to an older vision of a liberalism and a leftism that would protect the Jews, as it sometimes did in the past. They don't want to think about the mass immigration of non-white immigrants steeped in Jew hatred. It's a very dangerous thing for the Jews to take up, but it's a fact of life. And finally, they're failing to understand the misalignment between progressive politics and Jewish communal welfare. In general, our leaders are utopian and their progressive and universalist worldviews make protecting Jews seem parochial. You know, we want to be for everybody. We want to be for everybody. They think that their mission should be to fight all forms of hatred with the same vigor and the same resources. They assume that we have enough money and we have enough security to do that. They are politically partisan. And they're not held accountable. You know, these people who would criticize you, if any Jew criticized them, are the first to criticize the elected leaders, the elected Jewish leaders in Israel. They themselves here are not elected. They're anointed by wealthy donors who don't hold them accountable. Okay, so they're making these mistakes. They think that fighting racism and promoting social justice will reduce hatred. But you know what? That was their strategy, and it blew up in their face because it's the very groups that we helped, the feminists, the gays, the Blacks, the Latinos, the transgenders. They're the ones who are most targeting Israel and supportive of Israel. They thought that there would be reciprocity. They thought that there would be, they would stand with us as we stood with them. That didn't happen. It blew up, okay? They think that training people about sensitivity in the Holocaust are effective. They're not effective. It's just, there's no study that shows that that's effective. They think that we have enough resources to protect everybody in the whole world. And they think that we can benefit from the influx of immigrants from Jew-hating cultures, and we are not going to benefit from that. So if you take a look at any one of the web pages of the federations, the ADL, I mean, the AJC is turning in the right direction, I have to say, but the JCRCs, and here's what you're going to find. This is what they're doing with our money. Their main focus is still on this older strategy that they don't know what to do about, that has failed. Okay, so now what is to be done? And I'll end and we can have a discussion. We're in a state of emergency. Our leaders need to mobilize the community, to educate us about all of the sources of anti-Semitism. I know David Harris just broke with the rest of them, and he's the head of the AJC. He said, we have to be swivel-headed. We have to see dangers from every side. We have to stop just looking at the right. We have to develop and promote leaders who are willing to fight back for us. We have to prioritize our resources because we're in a serious emergency situation. And we have to build alliances. We can build alliances with people who have mutual interests, with Asians, with evangelical Christians, with conservatives, with Black conservatives. People are doing this, by the way. We have to talk to people about the actual true nature of Jew hatred, that it's a conspiracy theory. It's not like the other hatred. And I think that's what we have to do. Now, I have decided, after all of my work for the last 30 years in fighting the external enemies, the professoriate and the high school curricula and the liberal churches and the Islamists, the radical Islamists, and the Black anti-Semitism, I've decided we cannot win. I've been blessed because I know all of the people who raced to the front lines to stick their fingers in the dike because the leadership of the Jewish community didn't do what it needed to do. So we started, and all of the wonderful people that I know and I love, from Camera to Stand With Us to ZOA. I mean, for Hasbara fellows, I could, I'm going to miss 10 of them, but they're all SPME. All of those people are fighting the external enemy. I don't think they should do it. God bless us. We should still all do it. We can't win unless we challenge Jewish leadership to change. I think we can do it. I've started a project to do it. If you want to work with us and challenge your own local Jewish leadership, challenge doesn't mean bash them in the head necessarily. Challenge means to talk them through this, to talk them into a new strategy, to ask them about what strategy they're now going to have. If you want to work with us, send me an email. Subject is roundtable. So I'm going to stop sharing and I'm back and we can do questions.
Let me just thank you, Charles. Thank you so much. And I'm sure we're going to have a lot of questions. And so obviously everyone is not going to be able to ask a question. So given the volume of people who are attending. So I want to thank you very much for your thought-provoking presentation. And I'm going to just call on people and I'm going to ask you, please ask a question so that, and let's give Charles the floor to respond. So Stephanie, you've raised your hand and I appreciate those who've raised their hand. I'm going to call on you first since your hand was raised and you could ask Charles a question. You have to unmute yourself.
Unmute yourself. Stephanie, unmute yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think that was a mistake.
Oh. You didn't mean to raise your hand?
No.
Okay, Joseph.
All right, I'll pass it on.
Yeah, hi. My question is, how can we or should we use the legal system to protect Jewish college students on campus against threats?
Sometimes things get stuck.
Well, there are groups that do this. Brooke Goldstein's group, William Jacobson's group, Legal Insurrection. There are groups that do this and they demand and they sue for on behalf of Jewish students. I have to tell you, we've tried to do this many times. You go try and get a Jewish student to be a plaintiff in court, and you try to explain to his parents that he has to stand up for the Jewish people, even though it means that he's going to have pushback from the academic world and from his teachers, and he may not ever get a good reference to go on to graduate school. So it's very, very hard, first of all, to get, the Jewish world. We think the ticket to success is through college and education and the academic world. And so you're gonna blow that up. It takes a lot of courage and it takes special people to do it. But once in a while there are lawyers there that will do it. And if you have a case, let me know and I'll refer you to a good law firm that does that. Next.
But what about putting pressure on Jewish alumni when it comes to contributing money to the alumni associations?
Okay, that's been a suggestion that's been with our groups in the last 10 or 15 years. There are people who are organized. I know Steve Gerzoff, who's with us. He's organized alumni at Tufts University. Here's the problem. The Arabs have more money than the Jews. Do you know how many millions and hundreds of millions of dollars are going to the top 10, 15, 20 universities in America from the Arab world. I know I started this business with this wonderful woman named Rachel Fish. She's a heroine to the Jewish people. I gave a talk at Harvard University. I explained that Harvard just took $2 million gift from an anti-Semitic source in the Gulf states. Rachel came up and single-handedly, because not one Jewish professor would help her. Hillel didn't want to hear about it. Even tenured Jewish professors didn't want to help her. She did it all by herself, and she forced Harvard University to give back the $2 million. Well, guess what happened? Next couple of years happened. Somebody gave him $30 million, and no one was going to force him to give back the $30 million. So it's nice that Jews don't give money. I think you should all know that Barry Weiss yesterday, who's a friend of mine, announced, along with a wonderful group of professors and scholars, that she is tired of the universities trying to fix themselves. They're not going to fix themselves. They have started a new university in Austin, Texas. So that's another way to do it. I'm afraid that Jews don't have the money that the Arabs do. Of course, don't give the money. You're absolutely right. Don't give the money.
Randolph, you've raised your hand.
You're muted. Whoever Randolph is, he's muted.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to tell you, I used to be an official in the ADL. I was director of community services in the DC, Maryland regional office of the ADL many decades ago. I absolutely loved your talk. You're right on target. The Greenblatt ADL is an absolute disaster. I've had substantial experience investigating Nazis. Long before Deborah Lipstadt, I was the first to take on David, what's the guy from
David
England?
Irving.
Oh,
David Irving.
David Irving. Yeah, I debated him on television in 1977. And I've had a lot of experience, even those years, that many years ago, monitoring, analyzing, investigating, and following hate groups on the right and the left, including some of the worst hate groups that existed in the Black community. Besides that, my building, the old B'nai B'rith headquarters at 1640 Rhode Island Avenue, was taken over in probably the biggest anti-Jewish terrorist attack in the history of the United States, which was the Hanafi Muslim attack. And you think that, I don't want to belittle the other tragedies we've had. We came very close to losing over 100 people in an inferno in that building. People don't realize what it was like. But I wanted to say that I fully agreed with your analysis. I thought many of your points were spot on. If there's any way with my knowledge and expertise in history, I'd be happy to help you.
I would implore you to send me an email, charlesjacobs123@gmail.com, and you and I will have a conversation. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Carrie.
Take care.
Carrie, you were next.
Charles Yashikoach, it occurs to me that we're coming up on Hanukkah, and of course, the story of Hanukkah is about failed Jewish leadership and people that had to respond to keep Judaism alive. But part of that response was armed conflict. And as we're seeing more violence against Jews individually and against synagogues and organizations, people don't really want to talk about, let's say, the Jabotinsky response, and that is learning responsible armed defense in this country. I happen to be someone who is the shomer at my shul on Shabbos morning. I am an ordained rabbi. I'm a recovering Reform rabbi because obviously I don't agree with the agenda of the Reform movement. But it seems to me that in addition to relying on law enforcement, we have a moral responsibility to protect our own in conjunction with law enforcement. And I'm wondering, are you aware of any group that is advocating for this?
There are many groups advocating for this. I couldn't agree with you more. It's not my I don't work that side of the street. I'm not an expert on this, but in principle, you're right. The Jews will have only themselves to fall back on to protect ourselves. I love the American police. They're under siege themselves.
Yeah.
They're attacked themselves. Most of them want to protect us, but in the end of the day, there are, listen, we're all going to synagogues, and we know that there are people in our synagogues who have guns to protect us. This is happening. There are armed Jewish groups around the country. This is not my forte. If you, I can find them for you if you send me a note. Next.
Let me just read a question to you from the chat here. This is from Suzanne Sepperson. How are we to begin this re-education program? What is the state of Israel's position on how to proceed given the Israel bashing? And what do you think can be done, if anything, at the United Nations?
Well, Hillel Neuer is my hero at the United Nations, and I forgot the name of his group, but somebody will put it in the chat for UN Watch. He is amazing. He just mocks them. He calls them out. They can't stop him. And he's this mild-mannered but passionate guy. So the United Nations, go see Hillel Neuer and go give him money because he's just wonderful. The Israelis. Well, my favorite line on this is from my friend Daniel Pipes, who said, whoever would have imagined 100 years ago that the Jews would have made the best soldiers and the Arabs the best publicists, right? How in the world did we not, who can defend everybody, right? We defended the blacks and the women and the gays and the transgenders and the Latinos and gay marriage and this. We defended everybody, but not ourselves. And this goes back to, it's a longer piece than I can do right now, but this goes back to this Jewish problem of I have to be my Torah perfect self at all times, and it has to do with Jewish self-criticism, etc. There are books written about this. Ruth Weiss, also a fantastic, W-I-S-S-E, Ruth Weiss. Read her Jews in Power, and you can see why, all of the reasons why we're not very good at having power and defending power. I talked to, I think the rabbi was there at a discussion I had, and I said, well, why are we losing so many Jewish students? And somebody in this discussion said, well, the Jewish kids on campus, they don't like to see militarism and Israeli guns and all of that. And it's because we haven't taught them about world history. Every nation state that existed because it took land away from the people who were there before. We're not different about that. It's just that people take pictures of it. And it's happened more recently. And if you don't think that the Jews should have guns, then forget about a Jewish state, because without guns, there is no Jewish state, and go back and be a Jew, go eat a bagel at a deli. That's it. Next.
Jeffrey Sheff, I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly.
Sheff.
Hello. My statement is something that any Jew can do, that if enough of us do, would raise some eyebrows and cause possibly some change, is to change our political registration from Democrat to Republican. What is your thought on that?
Look, I have two thoughts about that. First of all, Carolyn Glick and also Melanie Phillips believe that there are about 30% of the Jews in America who think like I do, more or less, right? And the question is how to get them, that 30%, to engage with Jewish leadership, to force them, persuade them, convince them, push them into doing what they don't want to do, which is to look at the politically incorrect sources of anti-Semitism and to think of a new strategy. They're clingers, to use an old phrase. They're clinging to the old strategy because they don't know what to do. It's painful for them to internalize this betrayal of the left. They're terrified of the Farrakhaners. There's a way to beat Farrakhan, by the way. They're terrified of the Farrakhan. They just don't know what to do, and they're stuck. It's like deer in the headlights. So my job, and I hope you join us, is to find out ways how we can influence Jewish leadership to change their mind. Republicans and Democrats, I think there is a movement toward the Republicans by many Jews, but I don't know how. I think that's helpful. I do think that's helpful, at least to show the Democratic Party that you better stop the anti-Semitism that's sitting in the jihad squad that you've got. Can you imagine? This was our political home, and we asked Nancy Pelosi. We said, please. Ilhan Omar said the worst thing about Jews you could say, smack her. Tell her, call her out. And you know what they did? They didn't do it. They listed every hatred of man since Adam and Eve, and they condemned it all. Anti-Semitism was in that group, right? Thank you very much, Nancy Pelosi. So some way they need to be told that this is not the way to have Jewish voters and Jewish support and Jewish money. The Democratic Party has to take on the anti-Semites within their ranks. I think that's important. The other thing I want to say is it may well be that the most important fight now is between the classic liberals and the progressives. And I want to tell you that there's wonderful people that we don't agree with. Many of you won't agree with on many things, but we all agree that has to be free speech, to demand that equity results is there is a despite as many black lawyers that can be, is because the people who did better oppressed and are oppressing the ones who didn't do better. And so what does that mean? Since the Jews are the most successful, the Jews and the Asians, right? The Jews and the Asians, that's why the Asians are getting beaten up too. Since the Jews are the most successful, the Jews are the 1% of the 1%. This progressivism is inherently anti-Semitic. So I think it's extremely important to understand and root for and support the people like Barry Weiss and the people like John Haidt and Glenn Lowry, all of those people who are classic liberals like we are, believers in equality of opportunity, to support them, to follow them, and to help them. And that's very important.
There's a hand raised by, it just says iPhone, so I do not know who this is. So I can't call you by name. So if you've intended to raise your hand, you can ask a question. Otherwise, I have a question.
I think it must be, is that me?
Yes.
I would, okay, go ahead.
Okay, it's me, it's Joseph Freeman. And
Okay.
as you can hear from the accent, I'm not American originally. I've been in America 30 years. I just want to say a couple of things. 90% of British Jews have been to Israel. The second thing is most Jews, like me, who would have voted for the Labour Party, which is like the Democratic, have switched. Though somebody asked me at a meeting yesterday from a men's club, I belong to a synagogue, he asked me, what's the difference between British and American Jews? And I met, those are two comments I just want to bring to your attention. And I enjoyed your talk. And I must say the very bottom line is at the worst, as I say to my friends in London, we have got Israel. We don't have to feel victims anymore. I know most American Jews think this is the promised land. I get that. But I'm just saying that to you. I have a thought, though, about the universities. We have problems in Britain. I heard about this university in Austin, Texas.
Yes.
Why are Jews sending I don't want my grandkids to be going to these universities like Harvard or wherever and listen to this garbage. I'd rather they went somewhere else where they're getting an education and they're not getting demoralized by BS?
I think the answer to that is that Jewish leadership really has failed to explain to the Jewish population in this country just how bad things are on the campus. And they don't want to explain it because they don't have a solution for it. They don't want, they have always been afraid. You know, Judy Hirshon started this whole conversation when we made a movie. My partner, Avi Goldwasser, the filmmaker, and I made a movie, Columbia Unbecoming. And that was 2002. And we tried to explain and wake up the Jewish world about what was happening on campus. Then it was Arab and Islamic professors who were intimidating and harassing Jewish students. Now it's everybody. And we went to all of the major Jewish organizations. They didn't want to do anything because they didn't want to be seen as stopping free speech. They didn't want to be accused of being McCarthyite. And they have failed our kids on campus. And so therefore, they don't want to tell the parents how bad things are on campus. And this is a dereliction of duty. It's a terrible sin that they've done this. And so many American parents don't know, like you know, how bad things are, and they keep sending their kids to the schools.
Paul.
Thank you very much, Charles. I'm a longtime admirer of yours. You told a story about the ADL and camera being formed in Boston, and it was kind of like a turning point in the history of Jewish leadership. I didn't quite understand who did what and who didn't do what. Could you?
Yes. Okay. So when Andrea Levin and I were going to start the Boston branch of Camera, we were approached by two people. One was Steve Grossman, who was once the treasurer of the state of Massachusetts and was once the head of AIPAC nationally. And one was Leonard Zakum, who was the ADL rep in Boston, who was loved, deeply loved, and he very unfortunately died a young man. They said to us, don't start Camera. Let the ADL, we'll go to Foxman, because if Abe Foxman is the one who says to the world that the media the press is lying about the Jews again, right? Don't forget that it was defamation that got us into the concentration camps. That will make a big difference. But if you say it, it's not as powerful. You'll be just one of many groups inside the big tent, and you won't be able to speak. You won't be able to claim honestly that you speak with the voice of the Jewish people. And we said, you're right. And we were hoping, and Lenny Zakum's words were, let the ADL be the ADL for Israel. And Foxman declined. We can all guess why, because he wanted to have his letters published in the New York Times. It was an important thing for him. He was going after Pat Robertson at the time. He was going after the Nazis at the time. He didn't want to do this. He knew that many people within the Jewish community were already critical of Israel. He didn't want to lose his left-wing donor support. This is I don't know for sure, I'm guessing. But I think that the moment that he declined to do that meant the following. It meant that the new anti-Semitism, which is anti-Israelism, which is Palestinianism, was not going to be fought by our Defense Department, which was the ADL, with their hundreds of millions of dollars. And so that's when the rest of us ran to the barricades. That was exactly when we formed Camera. We formed then later the David Project. Then there was Stand With Us, and Mort Klein was always there at the ZOA, God bless him. And then there was Hasbara Fellows, and then SPME, and then Emmett of Sarah Stern's Emmett. And all of these wonderful people ran to the barricades. Why? Because the ADL wasn't there. So we're sticking our fingers in the dike against a tsunami of hatred. And I tell you again, I don't know that we can win this. We should all be doing that stuff. Support every one of those and more that I've said. They're wonderful. I'm blessed to know them all. I deeply, deeply love them. But I don't know that without changing Jewish leadership that we can win. We haven't won. It's getting worse.
I think in the last 10 years, your efforts have borne fruit. Yours and all those other people that you've named, that the light bulb has gone on. There's been a sea change in some people's thinking, not everybody's. There's plenty of people on the left that just don't want, they're in denial, don't want to hear this. But there's more and more, and every day eyes are opening. And I think Barry Weiss is going to be a major standard bearer.
I agree with that. I agree with that, but I'm afraid that, I've had this talk with intellectuals around the world, and even the most eloquent of them, and I'm not among them, even the most eloquent of them will tell you it's going to be blood in the streets that change people's minds. You try to argue with somebody who has become a religious left, who has adopted these ideologies. It's so easy for Jews to become universalists because it's the best way to hide from and to run from the burden of being a Jewish particularist, and that's what we are, we're particularists. It's so easy because those who go to the Marxist side or the universalist or the globalist side, they can look down upon you and they can say, you just care about this little tribe. I care about all of humanity. So that's a hard one. I hope arguments work. I think pain, pressure, humiliation, shame, mockery, and blood in the streets are more powerful. Sorry to say.
I read a history of scientific and medical progress, and one doctor said, "You bring progress by educating the next generation of doctors, because the current generation is set in their ways, and your focus on education and education of the next generation is commendable."
Well, but we don't have the platforms to do it, because the people who have the platforms to do it are the currently failing Jewish leaders. I mean, don't forget that this whole business about tikkun olam, people who don't want to fight to protect the Jews against any and all enemies and any and all comers, have adopted, I call them tikkunistas. They have in a way twisted the whole concept of tikkun olam. Yes, we're going to repair the world, but we're going to be holy. We're going to follow God's commandments to do it. And tikkun olam doesn't mean socialism. Never meant socialism. So, and there are great guys who've written books about this, but that's so much of the Jewish world has been taken over. I mean, I think Judaism in a way has been hijacked in this way.
We have time for a few more questions. And Andrea?
Can you hear me? Yes? Oh, thank you. Hi, Charles. It's Andrea in Toronto from the Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation.
Hi.
Hi. I first wanted to just say for the people here that in Canada, it's exactly the same story. And we did have a moment in time when people who had normally voted on the left voted on the right when Stephen Harper was the prime minister. Not the first time, but when he came back the second time, when they'd already seen that he supported Israel, they did move to the right. However, they've moved back to the left. And so now we have an even more leftist, less pro-Israel government than we've ever had. So very similar pattern. So my question about the leadership, it seems to me that while we can all see that the guys in the CEO role are not doing their job, it's the boards of directors that keep them there. Either they're too lazy to evaluate what's going on, or they spend too much money and like getting the recognition. But if we don't get the boards to wake up, and I'm wondering if you've had any success, or if anybody has, number one, with the boards, and number two, finding younger people like Barry, because if what's happened here is when someone's retired, been replaced by another Alta Cucker. We are just putting the same people in place who are also old. There's no younger generation coming up that wants to play the leadership role in our communities.
Yeah. Okay. So on the boards, you're absolutely right. It's a funny thing. Most people are just conformists. I've talked to board members. I've talked to big donors who say, I believe everything you say, but my wife and we're friends with all these people. We go to dinner with them, we go to synagogue with them. How are we going to have this conflict? And I say, but do you realize how important this conflict is? Do you realize how dangerous the situation is? And they're just leading us down this dark alley and there's a thug down there waiting to be, and it's cowardice. So we have a plan. Again, you have to write me and we'll talk about it. We want to talk to these board members. We want to talk to these leaders, and we want to develop people in locales to do it in a special way. And so email me. The young people, you're right, there are young people coming up. Barry Weiss is my friend and my heroine. My daughter worked with her at the Wall Street Journal under Bret Stephens. And she's amazing. And there are other ones too. There are other groups cropping up. And there will be, read Tablet Magazine, it's wonderful. Leo Leibovitz, and read Ben Weinstein. There's other people coming up. How we can get, Mosaic is wonderful. The Tikva Fund is magnificent. There are all these wonderful, wonderful things that are cropping up, and we can find them and support them. You're absolutely right. And thanks for coming, Andrew.
Thank you. We have time for one more question, and then I'm going to ask Judy to offer some closing words. So David Goldenson.
You're muted.
I listen to this, and I wonder if it's not a deeper problem with the Jewish Democratic leaders, with the reform movement leaders, that you're asking them to step out of their comfortable spot and speak out. And I don't think it's something that's easily done, because these are like their beliefs. I don't, in the reform movement, I've had personal experience, and they would just rather you didn't talk at all. I mean, when you try and talk, you get canceled out. So I don't know how you can take an ordinary people and say to them, it's time for you to give up the reform movement. It's time for you to stop being a Democrat. And I wonder how that's what needs to be done. It's what needs to be said. That's the argument I have, but it doesn't seem to penetrate. It's just too cozy. They'd have to give up everything they accept just for the one thing you're talking about.
Well, I agree with you, except I would say, first of all, our experience, we're trying this, and we're trying to have people call and write their leaders and say, okay, explain to me what's the new strategy. Do you see what I see? Do you see that the people that we've embraced are now turning on us? Do you see that Jews are getting beaten up in the streets by Black people that we have supported? Do you see that the feminists are kicking Jews out of marches? Do you see the Democratic Party? So what are you going to do? And you know what's interesting? Many of them will tell you, we don't know. We don't know what to do. We're going to have a task force on anti-Semitism. So I think that there's a moment now in time where they may be weaker and they don't know. And if more and more people just ask them the question, you don't have to be all that pushy. You could be. I mean, some people are just generally more pushy than others, but you don't have to be just, what are you going to do, Rabbi? What are you going to do, JCRC leader? What should we do? This presses them, because there's a reality in the world that that many of them, they're decent people. They just think the wrong delusional stuff. I believe that kind of pressure will have an effect. And at the end of the day, if they don't, there are ways to organize, political pressure on them. Okay.
Judy, I'm going to ask you to offer us some closing words.
Thank you. Rabbi, I'm so grateful to you for allowing us to do this program. I have wanted to have Charles Jacobs speak to a group on Long Island, and by the miracle of Zoom, we have gone way beyond our congregation and reached out to so many. And when I see somebody like Andrea Spendel, who I'm so in awe of, and there are so many talented people out there, so many that you've named, Charles. The Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights, that was formed specifically to fight a legal battle for Jewish students. And I think maybe you wanted to say a few words about Title VI and what was happened with the EU. Finally, there is a legal instrument to be used. The Jews were the one group on campus who had no protection legally, and that has changed. But mainly, I really, really hope that rabbis will have this very painful, very, very uncomfortable conversation. But if we don't do it, and we can't look to where we do get together in groups, and starting with our synagogues, that we can make a lot of progress if we'll just open up and listen to leaders like Charles. And I thank you, Charles, from the bottom of my heart, really. And thank you, Rabbi, for bringing us all together.
Yeah, thank you, Rabbi. I really appreciate your hosting this. It's very important to us. Thank you.
Thank you again.